Welcome to Long Beach 2000. This is a public affairs program that examines issues of concern to our community. I'm Larry Allison, editor of the Press Telegram, and with us tonight is a panel of 7 distinguished guests representing a variety of opinions on this subject, the subject being earthquake safety and the preservation of historic buildings. We'll start by introducing our guests. First, we have Professor Joe Plechnik, a professor of civil engineering at Cal State Long Beach, and who is active in the preservation of older structures. Eugene Zeller, who is superintendent of building and safety, City of Long Beach. Ed O'Connor, retired director of building and safety, City of Long Beach. Stanley Cohen, who is the developer of Shoreline Square in downtown Long Beach, which includes an office tower and the about-to-open Sheraton Hotel. Doug Otto, an attorney and preservationist. Ernie Kell, mayor of Long Beach. Evan Browdy, councilman, 1st District, Long Beach. Now, before we start, we have a brief documentary produced by Dave Kelly on the subject that we're dealing with tonight. And here now is that story.
Preserving old historic buildings has become one of the more sensitive issues in this city. Long Beach has several unique architectural structures dating back to the early part of this century. The problem is, many of those structures need renovations. Without those renovations, the buildings face almost certain demolition. The renovations are necessary for basically 2 reasons: to bring the old structures in line with current seismic safety codes and to make the buildings attractive and viable for contemporary uses. The need for seismic safety codes came about as a result of the 1933 earthquake in Long Beach. That quake resulted in severe damage to local schools and other buildings that were not well constructed. However, most of the major business buildings downtown survived relatively intact. Those are the buildings today that are undergoing heavy scrutiny. Structural engineer Jim Hill says the results of the '33 earthquake are incorporated in current testing methods.
We're using the performance of some of the buildings during the 1933 earthquake as a means of establishing the strength of the buildings. We're taking modern building dynamic simulation techniques, simulating the 1933 Long Beach seismic event on a building and determining, since we know what happened to it in 1933, we can come up with a good estimate of what the building strength characteristics are, and we can use that then to predict what would happen in other types of earthquakes.
How well a building holds up today is partly dependent upon how well any necessary repairs or renovations were done right after the '33 earthquake. According to Jim Hill, the concrete and steel buildings from that era are actually in pretty good shape.
In general, a building of that magnitude was pretty well designed in those days. So even though they didn't have a specific seismic code to design to, the quality of the workmanship, the quality of the design was basically good. And we're finding that when we start to analyze these buildings through the methods, for instance, that we were talking about, and start to look at the intrinsic characteristics of the buildings, that the cost of strengthening them is not as dramatic as was one time feared. We're talking millions and millions of dollars, and I know we've looked at some buildings and we're finding that they do need some strengthening, but the cost of that strengthening is very affordable.
The second part of the historic building preservation process involves finding contemporary uses for renovated structures. Those uses must take into account modern business or housing needs. The economics must also be competitive with other existing structures. The Villa Riviera is an example of a building the owners are trying very hard to save. The owners, in this case, are the individuals who own apartments inside the building. Many of them also live in those apartments. Florence McKendry owns an apartment and operates a real estate office in the Villa Riviera.
It used to be the older people that loved it, but the younger people, more and more of them every year, just love this building and are moving into it as their home. And I think that if Long Beach loses buildings such as this, and if they go on losing any more, it's just going to be very tragic. And we're not going to have a beautiful downtown Long Beach. We're going to have something that's just the same as you can find anywhere else. I just love the idea of the mixture between the old and the new.
The Long Beach skyline is obviously changing. Redevelopment is continuing at a feverish pace. However, as the new buildings go up, promising economic vitality, the old structures are in danger. And with them, a piece of Long Beach history is going by way of the wrecking ball. This is Dave Kelly for Long Beach 2000.
Thank you, Dave. Well, let's begin our discussion with some questions of Professor Plechnik. Professor, you were involved in retrofitting of the First Congregational Church. Could you tell us, first of all, why, in your view, the church was worth saving, and in what way it didn't meet earthquake standards, and what would have happened if you had not come up with some way to deal with this?
Well, the church, I think, was described as structurally inadequate for possible future seismic activity by, I presume, the city of Long Beach, and I think Mr. Zeller will surely talk more about that. But in our opinion, we were requested by the church in cooperation with Ed O'Connor and another engineer, Mr. Dave Breholtz, to look into the possibility of saving the church in its present form, intact, without any alteration in the features of the building. And over the past 5 or 6 years, we have worked at this university, Cal State Long Beach, in developing a new technique for possibly saving such landmark buildings. And this technique basically involved coring deep holes through the center of the walls and inserting reinforcement bars and then following up with a grout material. And this would hopefully be as good as some of the new masonry construction that's currently going on here in Long Beach and in other parts of the state of California.
If you had not done that to the church, what could you have expected in a major earthquake?
Well, in a major earthquake, it's perhaps, we don't know. We didn't go through the procedure of analysis. However, some other people did do that, and their analysis indicated that the church would have probably suffered major structural damage in one form or another, possibly a total collapse. So this technique, as I said, hopefully restores the building to the structural integrity required for future earthquakes.
Now, you have a special interest in this subject. I assume you see the church as worth saving, first of all. Could you tell us why?
Well, the church is, of course, a very beautiful historic structure with an immense history for the past almost 100 years, and buildings of that type and perhaps other buildings of perhaps not as old as that should be saved and preserved for future generations to see into a...
What are some other examples in the Long Beach area?
Well, in the Long Beach area, there are a number of buildings downtown, and I'm sure that some of the other panelists are far more familiar with that, more so than I am. But in the state of California as a whole, for example, there are virtually hundreds and hundreds of buildings that I think if they would be torn down, they would be a tremendous loss to future generations.
Okay. Mr. Zeller probably has something to say about that. Your responsibility in Long Beach is for building and safety. What are some examples of some of the buildings in Long Beach that might not survive an earthquake if they are not retrofitted in a way that the First Congregational Church was?
Well, the 1933 event demonstrated that the city is vulnerable to earthquakes, and many of our old buildings sustained rather severe damages. And the earthquake was of modest size, so one can't extrapolate that earthquake even to what future earthquakes might be. We might have larger earthquakes of longer duration and actually sustain more damages. Many of the buildings that are in downtown today were heavily damaged in the 33 event and then subsequently repaired. Some of those techniques not somewhat marginal in quality, and we're not really sure how they're going to react and actually strengthen buildings in future quakes.
Well, your responsibility is not just to save buildings, of course, but public safety.
Yes.
What is your level of concern at this point in Long Beach?
Well, my concern is that the 33 event, I think, rather clearly illustrated our vulnerability. And earth scientists today are saying there's a high probability of a large earthquake in Southern California. We have significant numbers of older buildings, particularly of concrete and especially masonry and some of steel, that weren't designed for earthquake resistance. and we're not really sure how they're going to react in a major event. The City Council in 1971 pioneered legislation directed towards strengthening these buildings or otherwise abating the earthquake hazard. We had roughly 930 buildings at that time. We've corrected approximately 300 and have 600 remaining. Of that stock, roughly around 13 have thus far been designated as historic buildings. My concern is to save those historic buildings rather than just having them demolished.
What's an example of one of those historic buildings that our viewers might recognize?
Well, there are many of them I think that they would recognize: the Villa Riviera, the St. Regis Apartments, the Lafayette, the Wilmore, just to name a few.
And are any of those, they're all presumably going to be retrofitted?
I hope so.
What is the most vulnerable, in your opinion? And
I couldn't quantify which
not
would
in
be the
terms of
most.
safety so much as serious questions about whether the retrofitting is going to be done.
Well,
Any that our viewers ought to be concerned about?
I'm going to be optimistic that all of them will be retrofitted. I really don't have any inside knowledge of whether they will be or not. We were somewhat dismayed that we lost the Pacific Coast Club and the Juergens Trust building. We're hoping that that'll be the last of the buildings that the owners choose to demolish rather than strengthen.
Now, those were not so much safety issues, though, were they? They were as much had as much to do with economics and redevelopment as safety, did they not?
I can't speak to the redevelopment. I only can speculate that it was the economics issue that resulted in those buildings being demolished.
Right. Well, you know, as our foremost safety expert here, what's your advice to viewers and relative to the next earthquake when it does come?
In terms of their buildings, I think the first recommendation I'd make is that they seek and obtain good technical counsel on the ability of their building to withstand these types of ground motions. Hire, if they're not already themselves of this profession, hire a competent structural engineer or architect to try and analyze how that building might perform in an earthquake, as illustrated in the film just a few minutes ago. They can give them intelligent counsel, and then with that counsel, hopefully undertake what strengthening measures are needed to prevent collapse.
Let's talk to your predecessor, Mr. O'Connor. You have a reputation nationally and even worldwide for having helped put together the most stringent rules on earthquake, what shall we say, aversion construction techniques in Long Beach. Do you have any second thoughts about what you have wrought?
No, I don't, because when I went to work for the building department back in 1946, many years ago, one of the things I became aware of was the 33 earthquake and the damage to existing buildings. And at that time, the building department didn't have the authority to request that these damaged buildings be rebuilt in an earthquake-resistant manner. The then city attorney told the head of the building department that you're going to have to let them patch them up so that they're no worse than they were prior to the earthquake. So that's why you see so many patch jobs around town. Fortunately, many of the patch jobs are getting few and far between. But I realized that we had a problem that had never been faced up to. The only problem that was faced up to here in Long Beach prior to the time that I got interested in it was the public schools. The public schools were required to be retrofitted, and Long Beach led the state in correcting their buildings. In fact, the then superintendent of the department, he talked the board into a policy of not letting any children go back into any of the buildings until it was approved by the Division of Architecture. The Division of Architecture got the authority following the 33 earthquake. Within a month following the 33 earthquake, they passed legislation so the state preempted the field of public school buildings structurally. And knowing that that existed, well, it gnawed on me. I felt, why should a kid have 1 degree of safety in school and then go out of school and go down to a theater building that could collapse on them? And so I waited for an appropriate time, and I was able to get an amendment to the building regulations that set the building department up as the authority to recognize existing hazards, not only in earthquake but in fires and wide open stairways. So after we got that authority, why then we moved into the field of finding receptive owners, and then there was a case in Bakersfield versus Miller. Bakersfield wanted Miller to enclose stairways in his hotel building, and he told the city of Bakersfield to go get lost. So they went to court, and the local superior court sided with the city of Bakersfield. However, he appealed it to the appellate court. The appellate court turned around and unanimously overrode the local superior court. It was then appealed to the California Supreme Court, and the California Supreme Court then overrode the appellate court. And the city attorney says, now you can go out and condemn these buildings. So we condemned, I don't know, 100 and some odd, and got the bucket of worms crawling. And
and ended up with one of the probably the toughest earthquake codes. Well, let me ask you a personal question based on your expertise. Are there many buildings in Long Beach that you would not want to be in personally during an earthquake?
Yes.
How many would you say?
I don't know now. Fortunately, a lot of them.
Fewer. Huh?
Fortunately, a lot of them are gone.
And what would your advice be to a viewer who was in a building and not all that sure about the structural integrity of the building, and the earth starts moving? What should that person do?
Well, unfortunately, the average individual doesn't know structures, and that's not belittling the average individual. They just don't know the hazards of buildings. And,
I mean, should they run out, or?
So that's why that's why I felt I should move into the field.
Right.
Well, sometimes running out ain't too good either,
No.
because parapets fell on people in the '33 earthquake. But
what I've heard is that best advice is if you can't get under something pretty strong, to stand in a stout-looking doorway.
yeah,
Is that good advice?
Yeah, that's good. That's where I moved in the Whittier earthquake. I was.
And you survived.
I staggered out of bed in the morning and
That
was
sounds like good advice. Let's turn to Mr. Cohen about some of the newer development thing that is going on around town. Mr. Cohen, you're responsible for putting up a spectacular project, and I've heard a lot of reaction to it. I'm sure you have too, and nearly all of it is positive. That's the curving Sheraton hotel building that's about to open. What is your feeling? Of course, you're helping to build our city, if you like. What's your feeling about the responsibility of a developer in terms of preserving buildings that seem worth preserving, as opposed to scooping them away and building something new?
Well, Larry, it's a difficult subject to generalize about. Certainly every developer, I think, has been exposed to projects that are definitely worth developing in terms of preservation. No city, I believe, can survive completely as a new city. I think that the cities that we identify as having charm and character and grace usually have an attachment to the past. They've done a good job of balancing the past with the future. And the real challenge, of course, is knowing how much time and effort and money to expend on either side of the scale. When you look at older buildings, it's important to remember that, like new buildings, they have to satisfy certain criteria in order to sustain themselves. One criterion would certainly be the fact that the building must be adaptable to contemporary usage. To try and preserve an old hotel with rooms that are tiny compared to modern day standards is probably economically futile. And I think the same type of judgment could be made on other buildings. You have to look at the type of function for which they might be suited. And then, of course, it's very important to determine whether or not a project like that is economically sustainable. We'll stipulate that the building has the aesthetic values of architectural attractiveness or whatever it might take to justify their preservation. But I think it's terribly important that the other criteria not be overlooked either.
Well, what about, let me put you on the spot. Let me ask you your personal opinion about, I mean, it's easier, we know it's going to be an easy answer when we ask a preservationist about, say, the Pacific Coast Club or the Villa Riviera. What are your personal feelings? That the Pacific Coast Club was worth saving, or it was impossible to save it, and it was inevitable that it was going to come down and be replaced by something new?
Sadly, I think I would have to conclude that that was the case with the Pacific Club. And I might mention one that I did have a more direct opportunity to examine was the Juergens Trust Building. Now, there was an old building which a lot of people in Long Beach felt very strongly about. I did have the chance to look at the Juergens Trust Building as a conversion to either a new office building or a new hotel. And in each case, it would have been virtually impossible to bring it up to the standards of a contemporary hotel or a contemporary office building. And again, it was one of those instances where the identity with the facade, with the elevations or the exteriors of the building, I think drove a lot of people to try and save it. And that effort was definitely justified because perhaps somewhere along the line, some type of adaptation could have been developed which would have allowed the building to be saved. But after you've exhausted those avenues, it seems to me that realism has to be taken into consideration and a plan developed which either represents the best possible usage of that building in its older form or accepts the fact that it can't be saved.
Well, let's ask Doug Otto, who is a lawyer and a preservationist and not a builder, if you agree with that perception or have a different one.
Well, perception about the Juergens Trust Building, about the Pacific Coast Club,
Both.
about historic buildings in general?
And all of that.
Okay. I think that it's important for any city that treasures its historic past to first and foremost ask questions about its significant historic landmarks and whether they can be preserved. We fought a long, hard battle over the Pacific Coast Club, and I suppose it was my ultimate conclusion that under the circumstances, it was very, very difficult economically to save if you were talking about trying to put that building back into public use as a building itself. At the end, when the developer ran out of time, we were looking at broader approaches, trying to incorporate the next block, trying to take into consideration the adjacent land, and trying to preserve the Pacific Coast Club as part of a development project incorporating a significant piece of territory rather than just the building itself. It seems to me that a city's priorities are reflected, certainly architecturally, in the extent to which the city looks at its historic structures, and I mean its significant historic structures, and tries to incorporate them into the fabric of the city. I certainly agree with Mr. Cohen that a city which is exclusively new lacks the character, the charm, the grace of the communities which we've come to identify as our outstanding communities. And hopefully Long Beach will take that 1920s, 1930s Art Deco, Art Moderne flavor which it has traded on for so long and incorporate that into its future.
Let me ask you personally and specifically about the Juergens Trust Building. I have a sister-in-law who worked there in an office years ago and has a deep personal attachment, but that's not the same thing as saying that it has significant value beyond that. What's your personal opinion about that specific building?
Well, I better put my dirty linen on the table. I had an office there for some time myself, so I may not be entirely unbiased about that question, but I think that the building had tremendous historic significance to the city. Not only was it an architecturally attractive building, but it was one of the first branch court buildings in the United States, and I still hear stories from lawyers all around Long Beach about the cases they tried in the building. I remember one story told to me by a judge recently about a case he heard where Joe Ball finished up a closing argument just as the band struck up God Bless America out at the next to the Spit and Argue Club on Rainbow Pier. And
Did he win the case?
Well, only Joe Ball seemed to be able to orchestrate things like that, if you'll pardon the pun, but who won or lost was irrelevant. It's things like that have importance to the citizens of Long Beach, and I think certainly the building had significant historic memories for people. What's sad about the Juergens Trust Building, and I think most everyone here would agree, is that what we are winding up with now is an historic hole in the ground. Mm-hmm. There is no replacement project. The owner of that property has elected to tear down an historic building without having anything in place to take its place, and
well,
that's a tragedy.
Let's ask the mayor how he feels about that. Is that kind of your fault, Mr. Mayor?
Well, no, I wouldn't exactly say it's my fault. I agree with Mr. Otto. I think very definitely a case of the Juergens Trust Building is a case in point. That was the reason that I proposed here this past month that the city have an Office of Historic Preservation. I'm pleased also to say, as you know, that the council approved that and also funding for that, so we're in the process now of advertising for that position. I'm hopeful one of the recommendations that I have to that officer is that he put together an ordinance that there are historic buildings not be allowed to be demolished until the owners of the property have financing in place and have a building permit for a new project. So we will not have, like Doug Otto pointed out, a historical hole in the ground in a place, so that at least we'll have options. Maybe if we had kept the Jurgens Trust building in place a little longer, perhaps Doug Otto and Renee Simon and Nancy Latimer and some of the others who worked so hard to try to preserve it may have found an alternative to demolishing it.
Well, that would take care of the next problem of that kind that comes up. What was the problem in the past, that this process simply didn't happen?
It didn't happen. We do not have an ordinance in place now, and I think we should have, that require a developer or an owner of a historical building, before he demolishes it, that he have financing in place and he have a building permit, exactly what he's going to build, so we don't end up with a historical hole in the ground, as Doug Otto so proudly pointed out. I think, too, that this office will be able to help the owners of historical buildings to locate financing for retrofitting historical buildings. And as the professor pointed out, I think it's important with this core technique that he has developed that a lot of these buildings can be saved. In fact, I think, as Mr. Cohen pointed out, maybe the Breakers Hotel could have been converted into, instead of single hotel rooms, double hotel rooms, as people now want larger hotel rooms than what's on the Breakers. That might be a possibility. And I think it's very important that we try to preserve some of our past to remind us of our future.
I think that there's a new understanding today, too, about the economic value of preservation. In the past, people believed that historic preservation often represented white elephants in a community, but more and more we are understanding, and there have been studies that have been done and commissioned by the state legislature, which show that if you come to town to go to a convention for 2 days, you may stay an extra day to go to the historic sites, the ranchos, the historic buildings in a downtown area, to do those tours, because people like to understand the past. They like to pass that on to their children. And it's only been recently that people have begun to understand the relationship between both tourism and historic preservation and economic progressiveness and historic preservation.
Well, let's ask Evan Browder. You're the councilman for that district. Do you agree with these viewpoints?
Well, I think there's a lot of very positive things that have been said. I have to say that I do represent the downtown, and obviously 16 of the 19 buildings that have been discussed here today are in the downtown area. In my district, it's obvious that 13 of those need to be retrofitted, at least at this point, have not even begun to be retrofitted. There are a number of people who live in a number of those buildings, and so it's of great concern to my constituency to what happens. And Doug, and first of all, I have to congratulate the mayor on the proposal for that officer that we'll have in place in the city, and I think the council supported him wholeheartedly, because we felt that this was something we wanted to make a statement to developers and people in our city, that we think the texture of the city needs to be expanded upon. I think that the staff has seen over the years, and redevelopment is a point, early redevelopment of our city was build modern buildings, put up these, these sort of, some of the structures are interesting and architecturally beautiful, but they were tearing down a lot of what was the historical aspects of our city. And I think that some of that's stopped now. Some of it now, redevelopment has said, okay, let's go to Pine Avenue, let's go to some of these other areas, let's try to restore some of the buildings, let's deal with those things. The Masonic Lodge, for instance, at 228 Pine, is an example of a beautiful building that has been saved by both the developer and redevelopment aspects of the...
That's an example of a developer saving a building. Earlier when we were talking about the Pacific Coast Club, even when we were talking about creating a broader approach to solving the problem, who finally pays the bills?
In regards
in terms of preserving a building that can't be preserved economically. I mean, if a developer can't do anything with the building that makes sense, who then handles the economics?
This is a question that still hasn't been resolved, I think, by either the city, council, or the people as a whole. Whether this, I think the people, and we might want to go out and take a vote on it to the public, whether or not the public feels it's important enough to expend public monies to help restore or save historical buildings when a developer who has, and I might say that our staff has pushed a number of developers to look as hard as they can at trying to find, and Pacific Coast Club was an example. There was months and months of delay before demolishing began because the developer was pushed by preservationists, by the city, the manager, by myself and other city council people to find something, some use, some mechanism to not only save the building but also give the developer a reasonable return on his investment.
We need to take a break now, but let's come back to that point because there is a cost to all of this. But we'll be back with you in a moment. Well, we're back to resume our discussion of earthquake safety and the preservation of worthwhile older buildings. Mr. Cohen, we were talking a minute ago about who should pay the bill. From the point of view of a developer who is an expert on the economics of all this, what is your view? I mean, these older buildings, if they're going to be preserved, they're going to have a cost. Who should pay the cost?
Well, clearly it seems to me that the buildings will only be preserved if they have some economic vitality that they can bring along with them. I think all of us here share the belief that if there's any way to preserve a building that has historical value, that has character, it should be preserved. But there is an important qualification, and that is that the building is adaptable into some usage which is economically sustainable. Long Beach has a number of things that will contribute to its success and its recognition as a city. One of them is certainly its economic success, and perhaps more than most, Long Beach has a somewhat depressed economic past to live down. So it seems to me there's a special priority on making certain that any project that is worth doing does have the true ability to sustain itself in the future, because after the building is sustained, after the building is protected and preserved, the real question is who will pay the rent, whether it be an office user or a hotel guest or whatever. Someone has to be willing to take the risk that that project will succeed in an economic fashion. And at that point, it's usually the developer.
Well, no, obviously, when we're talking about economics, churches are a special case, but when we're talking about a building like the Pacific Coast Club, it was pretty evident that nobody wanted to pay the bills. Mr. Otto, do you, first of all, agree with the theses that Mr. Cohen was advancing? And secondly, when you talk about possibly having taken a broader approach to preserving the Pacific Coast Club, in that instance, who would have paid the bills?
Well, I do agree with Mr. Cohen. I think that ultimately a historic preservation project, just like any other project, must make economic sense. We're not interested in making Long Beach into an architectural petting zoo of old historic buildings. They have to be reused, adaptively reused into the economy. However, let me make a couple observations about why I think that is more likely to happen today than it was 10 or 15 years ago when Long Beach was really running scared, really trying to turn the corner economically with its downtown projects, and where the philosophy seemed more to be get as many bulldozers as you can at the top of the Vincent Thomas Bridge and go as fast as you can through downtown. Now that we have turned that corner, now that we have projects like Mr. Cohen's project at Shoreline Square, now that we have the Long Beach Mall in place, now that we have Pine Avenue starting to come back a little bit, I think there is a greater sensitivity to our historic past. And people are starting to look with a little bit closer eye, just like Lloyd Eichert did at the Masonic Temple, to preserving our historic buildings and seeing how they can be incorporated into our community structure and developing that sense of place which any community needs in order to become a real community and not just a place where people go to work.
Okay, but earlier when you mentioned taking a broader approach to save a building like the Pacific Coast Club, how might that work?
Well, the idea that we were exploring when Mr. Bellevue, the developer, ran out of time, and I have to say that he worked with us for an extended period of time on trying to save the Pacific Coast Club, we were talking about the possibilities of taking property from first to second place, as well as the property that the Pacific Coast Club sat on itself. We also would have used the property where the Titchener House is right now, and try and make that into an historic node. If you think about it, the Villa Riviera, the Titchener House, and the Pacific Coast Club were almost an historic district in and of themselves. Three of the oldest buildings in Long Beach with the most significance. The Titchener House, built by the Green brothers of world renown. The Pacific Coast Club, our castle on the beach with special things and memories that it had for many, many people in town. And the Villa Riviera, which when it was constructed in the mid-1920s won all kinds of architectural prizes. The question was, could we do something with that area if we took some more area east down the beach, or down toward the beach, down towards the east end of town, to make that area economically viable? Was there something that we could do? And like I said, I think we just ran out of time, but there were people who thought that that was the solution, that you had to look beyond the way we normally look at things, at a piece of property, and look at the region, look at the area, to come up with ways to solve the problems of particular buildings. And once again, I think what that reflects is a deeper consciousness about the need to preserve our very special historic buildings like the Pacific Coast Club.
Good. Councilman Browder, you had
I think, we've discussed historic buildings too, but we started this whole discussion on dealing with earthquake hazard abatement regulations that we have. And we have, as I mentioned before, roughly 13 more buildings that have been identified, 11 of which, I believe, or 10 of which are actually in the downtown area. And I was just looking down the list of those buildings that are here. Most of them are presently in use, are going to continue to be in use, and I think that's exciting because people live there. People want to participate and want to stay where they're living. I mean, we're talking about like the Villa Riviera, the Cooper Arms, the Lafayette, the Artaban Apartments, etc. The Wilmore, for instance, another good example. And a number of these, as I mentioned, Cooper Arms has roughly 159 dwelling units, 135 in the Villa Riviera, and 122 in the Wilmore. Those people want to stay, and the question really is, in their minds, how much do they have to do to retrofit their building to maintain the integrity of the building during, and so that Gene Zeller will say, you've done enough to be able to, that we feel that you can pass mustard during some sort of a seismic, problem, and therefore, you can stay afloat. And we have a number of senior citizens in many of those buildings who can't afford a major expense. Now, luckily, I believe that under some of the new guidelines that we have, or the new concepts that are being developed by the professor and others, some of those costs that we had originally thought for like the Wilmore, the Villa Riviera, which were going to be $1.5 million or $2 million, are now down in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, which, for many senior citizens who are on fixed incomes, and that's obviously the political problem I have to deal with, will be able to possibly deal with that amount of money, dealt over a period of time, you know, in some sort of a loan program. Now, whether or not, and the city's looking into this, and I think the mayor can, you know, vouch for this, the city has asked the manager to look into whether or not there is some loan program that we can develop to help pay, you know, put up upfront costs, but that would be paid back over a period of time, or maybe when the person sold their property or their interest in their building.
Supportive of that, or at least of looking into it.
Very much so. I mean, I don't know what it would cost altogether, but I think it's something we have to look into, because I think we have a responsibility, as Doug has said, to try, you know, to make a statement to our public that we want to save a number of these buildings. We want people to save their livelihoods. I mean, if they have to tear these buildings down, many of those people will lose their entire savings. They have either bought their place. Many of these are own-your-own apartments or condo-type situations.
Well, on the other hand, of course, some people are buying condos in the Villa Riviera today,
right,
knowing that they face some expenses down the road.
And I think they're willing to pay that, but there are a number of people who've lived there for many, many years.
And they're concerned about saving
yes,
their home.
And I think that's true.
When you were
also add, if I may, on that same subject that the councilman brought out, is that I set up a task force about 2 years ago on earthquake preparedness. That task force report is back, and the council now has authorized the manager, in fact, to negotiate, and they're getting ready to sign a contract with an engineering firm for about $120,000 to see if what new technology has come about that the professor recently came up with, to see if there's maybe some more cost-efficient methods of restoring some of these buildings. But also, as the councilman brought out, and I think Gene Zeller and everybody would agree, and Stan Cohen, that once these buildings are retrofitted and brought up to earthquake standard, it's actually going to increase the property values of these condominiums or these own-your-owns. So that maybe there's a vehicle where those that couldn't afford it could pay the loan back at the time of the sale, or perhaps at the time of death, or when it goes on to their heirs.
I think everyone recognizes, I'm in the savings loan business on this, you know, as another occupation. Fact is, most of the places, you cannot get loans for more than 2 or 3 years until 1991, unless they've been given the okay that they're going to survive past 1991. So what's happening is the values of many of these things are totally, you know, they're not inflated, the opposite, they're deflated. And a number of the villa places are selling, or Lafayette are selling for what is peanuts compared to what the real value would be if they were properly retrofitted and knew they would be.
Real values there. Well, I was going to ask you people, you know, why should our viewers care about this subject? And that's one reason. There's some good bargains out there. Seriously,
but
if
we
you
also
look at
have
the
housing
prices
quite frankly,
plus what it'll cost to
you're talking
retrofit
about basically a number of these. If they're not retrofitted, we're talking about destroying hundreds, maybe even thousands of units, you know, people's places where they're living. We don't have the housing stock we need. We've got people coming into the city by the droves. I mean, we are still a growing city, and we need housing stock. And this is a fairly inexpensive way, I think, in the long run, to keep good housing stock, preserve a number of these buildings, keep the texture of our city from deteriorating anymore, and that's why I'm very much in favor of trying to do something to help.
Well, I'll tell you one reason I care, the Press Telegram. I thought you were going to mention that the Press
yes.
Telegram is on your list.
That's
because
true.
It is. And
What have you done?
well, we've been talking to we've been talking.
No,
with
I think
an
they've already
engineering
taken it
company.
off the list because they don't think you'll do anything. No.
That's not true. And at first it looked like it would.
I saw something.
Well, actually, it's a very strong building. It rode out the 33 quake with no significant
you had
damage.
a tank problem in the 33 earthquake.
I know that well. A tank fell through the
water
through
tank
the roof
up on the top of the
water
building
tank.
came off its saddle and went down through at least one story.
That's true. But in 1933, I wasn't there, but they repaired the roof and did not replace the water tank. Originally, you're absolutely right. You mentioned that cost estimates are coming down as the technology improves. It first looked like it would cost us $1 million to retrofit the building, and now it looks like it's going to be significantly less than that. But we are getting busy on it.
But when you retrofit it, are you also looking at your equipment to see that if your equipment has a chance to remain functional following another Long Beach earthquake?
Such as?
You still print the newspaper.
Yes,
That's a
absolutely.
real economic thing to look into.
Absolutely, that the press lines don't shift and all that. Yeah. Well, what about our viewers? I mean, why should our viewers care about this subject?
Larry, I think any viewer who cares about the future of Long Beach would care about the outcome of discussions like these. First of all, I think the city of Long Beach has a very exciting future. I think the downtown area is perhaps one of the most exciting parts of the entire city because I think its future is so bright. But it's a future that won't happen accidentally or by chance. It's going to take very careful planning. The wisdom is to know how to integrate new development with the preservation of the old. And I think that's a very important point, because let me make clear that the new development shouldn't always be characterized as the bad guy on the block. The new development comes in and it creates higher values which perhaps offer more base from which the older buildings can be preserved. As the property values go up and the value surrounding older buildings increases, the ability of someone to take that older building and do something a little more imaginative with it becomes that much more of a potential. And like I say, it's a matter of wisdom. I think that balancing the two and making certain that the interests that are supporting each side of the equation get proper representation is the function of government and public groups who are interested in the city's future.
Well, what about a little passion here? There must be, is there a building out there that our viewers ought to be concerned about preserving? I mean, we've been talking about some that's too late to do anything about. Is there anything out there that said the Villa Riviera is not in any danger right now? There are steps being taken to preserve it, and it is kind of a
I would say that
central piece, but
St. Regis concerns me a lot because they have a number of problems there, and they have the bricks, the mortar on the outside are very loose. They're fading fast from what I've heard from our building people. I'm real concerned that they've already had to shut down the top floor, I believe, until they do some major restoration. There's a social salon, a salon or something, a solarium, whatever, on the top, and they have, and of course they have another problem because of the parking situation. Younger people are interested in moving in there, and they have no parking. There's 70 units in there, I believe, and 71, and there's not one parking space off the street. So,
well, now for those of our viewers who haven't seen this building, could you tell them what the address is?
It's 1030 East Ocean, and it's roughly around Second Place, I believe. And Second Place on Ocean. It's on the ocean side. It's an interesting and nice looking structure, and certainly architecturally one that we would probably like to keep around for a while. Mm-hmm. But again, it has some severe structural problems that have to be dealt with. And again, I'm trying to help them with a number of different problems they have, including a parking lot. But parking has to play some part in the historical preservation of those buildings as well.
How about you, Doug Otto? You were pretty passionate about the Pacific Coast Club. Any others on your list that you want to save?
Well, we're taking a wait-and-see attitude about places like the St. Regis. We are encouraged by two specific developments in this earthquake field. The first is the availability of new technologies like Professor Plesnik has worked so assiduously on. And structural engineers like John Karyotis up in South Pasadena have, over the last 10 years or so, really taken an opportunity to investigate ways that buildings were built a while ago and to develop new technologies to preserve those buildings while maintaining the integrity of those buildings and the historic fabric. In addition to that, relatively recently, the State Historic Building Code has not only been enacted but been mandated for qualified historic buildings, which enables structural engineers and architects to use creative and innovative ways of strengthening buildings which assure public safety and at the same time maintain the integrity of those structures.
Well, Professor Plesnik, are you optimistic about still more innovation when it comes to saving buildings that are vulnerable to earthquakes?
The possibility of new innovations, I think, is there. However, the whole concept of rehabilitation and strengthening of older buildings is fairly recent science, or art, as you may call it. And as a result, I think future developments, if and when they come about, will have to be rather sudden. The reason being that I think the city of Long Beach, the city of LA, and some of the other cities have a certain time schedule, which requires that these buildings be brought up to a certain requirement, a certain strength requirement. However, the development of new techniques usually takes not only a tremendous amount of money, but a considerable amount of time. The result being that new techniques, if they are developed, will have to be developed within a short span of time, perhaps in the next 2 or 3 years, so that they can be used in the very little time remaining to bring these buildings up to the requirements as set by the individual cities.
How about you, Mr. Zellner? Are you optimistic about this?
Well, I'm very pleased with what has evolved over the last decade or so. As Doug Otto mentions, there are some things that we have been able to do during this period. One has been the Senate-Core technique that we employed both at the church and the old First National Bank building, Bank of America building at 2nd and Pine, that First and Pine, are 2 buildings underway under that technique. There are other things out there that perhaps might present some opportunities. Base isolation is coming into more popular use for new buildings and is even being suggested for a retrofit. That is being used to retrofit a historic building in Utah as we speak. There has been some research done over the last couple of years that give us a better understanding of how these buildings react in earthquakes and giving us a better analysis tool. So I'm optimistic. I'm certainly hoping that the years and the near future will see much more important strides that we can use as tools.
Well, we're just about out of time, but we have enough time so that each of you has a chance to take one more shot, have one more word of advice or counsel to our viewers. Anything you'd like to add to that, Mr. Zeller?
Yes, I'm not an earth scientist, but I believe what the earth scientists are telling us. They're telling us that the earthquake is going to come and it's going to have major negative consequences for us. That locomotive's on the railroad and it's going to come at our station. It's something that we need to address in terms of the buildings that we live, work in, recreate in, and otherwise frequent. Some of those buildings that we're dealing with have great historic significance. I think we need to be sensitive to those buildings and hopefully save them rather than just throw out the baby into the bathwater and demolish the building.
And Professor Plechnik, do you have a last word?
Well, I would hope that the engineers, the city officials, and I think the public in general would perhaps gain a greater awareness and perhaps a greater appreciation of defined artistic structures that we have in this city. Certainly it's not Rome or some of the other masterful cities, but I think if you walk around the city, and I think you can learn and appreciate the wonders and the beauty of some of the masterful structures that we do have.
Good. Mr. O'Connor, what do you have to say about all this?
Well, I'm pleased that the City of Long Beach has updated the seismic safety element. They're out to contract now with a firm to look at methods of repairing existing earthquake hazardous buildings. There's another area that I want addressed, and I'm working on that. The purpose of the code is to adopt standards to protect life, limb, property, and public welfare. That means only one thing to me. Those standards should be such that the new buildings will ride all the earthquake excursions they're subjected to and high velocity winds and other high magnitude loads and still be a usable building. I'm of the opinion that the present requirements of the Uniform Building Code that Long Beach has adopted is deficient. And that should be investigated and a study made as to where the deficiencies are and try to update the seismic safety requirements of the Uniform Building Code so that it does protect life, limb, property, and public welfare.
Well, let's ask one of our public officials about this. Councilman Brody, what do you say about the deficiencies in our code?
Well, I'm certainly not an engineer. Certainly am concerned when I hear comments like that. We have a council meeting on Tuesdays, every Tuesday, almost every Tuesday, and I know that those kinds of questions will be asked of people like Mr. Zeller and our management staff as to whether or not it really truly is a problem. I am not going to take any chances with the lives of the people in my district, certainly not my own families, because I have a son that I want to be able to grow up and spend quality time enjoying the historical aspects of our city, as I would hope that all of our children would. So therefore, I will be happy to look into it. I think my final statement is that we need to be responsive to those concerns of the people who live in our area, and I think they're saying to us, not always unanimously in exactly how they're going to do it, but they're saying to us, we need to preserve our heritage. One way to do that is to try to do whatever we can to preserve our buildings, and that means dealing with retrofitting for earthquake, or whether it means just saving buildings that we think are good. Thank you.
Mayor Kell, what do you say?
I don't totally agree with Mr. Connors. I'm not an engineer. I have been a builder. I think that we have good codes here in Long Beach. I would challenge anybody that has positive proof that we don't to present them before the City Council, and we'll certainly will take a look at it.
Maybe I'll come down and do that.
Do that, sir. You're welcome. I would challenge his statement. I think we have excellent codes in the city. I think we have fine staff, and I think we are following through, probably have the finest building department in the United States. And I would challenge anyone that has proof of the opposite to furnish us with the necessary proof.
Good, okay. Mr. Cohen, what is your final word on this?
Well, you know, one of the beauties of our system is that entrepreneurial energy and activity has to be very sensitive and aware of other forces in the community. It has to do with business, it has to do with development, it has to do with a lot of things. And I just have a great faith in the system. I think that, that the future of Long Beach will be probably benefited by the great interest that has materialized here in developing the downtown area. I think some of that energy will be channeled into the preservation of historic projects. I think some of it will be channeled into new projects. And I think if we can rely upon the wisdom of our city government and of some of the more thoughtful citizens in the community, I think that the end product will be one in which we're all proud.
Mr. Otto, what do you have to say, including perhaps a suggestion about what our viewers ought to do about all this?
Well, I would like to go on record as agreeing with Mr. Cohen. I think what we're doing is talking about public policy decisions. And as always, public policy decisions have a lot to do with the marketplace. And what we have learned is that the public policy is telling us that there is great value in the historic preservation of the significant aspects of our community. And what the market is telling us is that because of that, there are going to be market forces operating which will create the need for the types of technologies that Professor Plesnik is developing and others. I hope that there are not artificial deadlines created which prevent the development of those particular technologies and bringing them into place. I think that it all works out because the community has an opportunity to tell its civic leaders what it is that they want, and that can be, and that those desires can be fulfilled. What can you do? Get involved. Get involved in your neighborhood. Get involved in your councilmanic district. If you've got an opinion, then come on down to City Hall or let your councilman know about it. This is a city becoming a community. It is a community which is exciting. It is a community that is going to be around for a long time, and everybody's got a chance to participate in it.
Well, there you are. So we're here not just to enjoy a city that somebody else built, but to come up with the entrepreneurial talent and energy to renew it and continue to build it, but also with a sensitivity for the safety and health of our residents and for the preservation of some of the beautiful buildings that were built before our time. Thank you for joining us at Long Beach 2000.